Hello, my name is Ian Nish, and I'm an adaptive economist, a seaweed farmer. In this video, I'm presenting a very personal perspective of how I saw valorization development of tropical Asian red seaweed farming. My phyconomy vocation has followed on the work of my father, Arthur Nish, who was a pioneer of red seaweed farming at a time when the field was almost exclusive to China and Japan. In 1965, I started a phyconomy life in my home province of Nova Scotia in Canada, in the frigid, stormy waters of the North Atlantic. But by 1974, I had experienced the joys of warm water in Indonesia. By 1977, it was clear to me the carrageenan seaweeds could not be grown at acceptable cost in cold waters with frigid winter climates. I've lived and worked in Southeast Asia ever since. What follows is my perspective on how a valorized tropical red seaweeds industry has developed in ways that were vastly different from options open along most North Atlantic coastlines. Commercial farming of tropical red seaweeds was stimulated by market pull from carrageenan and agar producers that were desperate for cultivated raw material sources. Ultimately, they developed a major industry through collaboration with impoverished coastal people who were hungry for cash crops in areas with limited economic opportunities. Until 1974, the carrageenan industry was almost totally dependent on wild cold water seaweed, mostly Chondrus crispus from Atlantic Canada. Efforts to grow Chondrus at an affordable cost have failed in Atlantic Canada and elsewhere until the present day. The carrageenan industry was headed for stagnation unless farm raw materials could be obtained. So major carrageenan processors commenced diligent farm development efforts starting in the mid-1960s. By the late 1970s, farmed euchumatoid seaweeds became a significant raw material source for the carrageenan industry. Commercial farming of euchumatoid seaweeds commenced in 1974 in Tawi-Tawi province of the Philippines, but Indonesia attained leadership in global tropical seaweed production by the mid-2000s. A driving force was ORDA, with a small office at the Goodwood Park Hotel in Singapore. ORDA was a collaboration of American, Danish, and French companies. Through the 1970s, these three companies dominated the carrageenan business with upwards of 90% of global market. Lesson 1. Tropical red seaweed farm development was funded and driven by entrepreneurial value chain players. Market system providers and governance enforcers got active only after seaweed farming and value chains were well established. Industry estimates for monthly production of raw dried seaweeds from Indonesia totals about 25 to 30,000 dry tons per month, including Capophycus, Gracilaria, and Euchuma. This map shows Indonesian seaweed source areas for about 2019-2020. This is a rather complicated figure, so feel free to pause this video and study it at your leisure. Confirmed data are unavailable, but informal industry consensus places current Indonesian seaweed production in the range of 300 to 360,000 dry tons per annum. Per official government estimates, however, current Indonesian production volume for all seaweed types is on the order of over 10 million wet tons per annum, which would be equivalent to over 1 million dry tons. Industry sources estimate that annual revenues accruing to Indonesian seaweed farmers is about $500 million US. That's around 7,200 billion Indonesian rupiah. Lesson 2. Since beginnings in the 1970s, seaweed production has become a major feature of coastal socioeconomics in the Philippines and Indonesia. Seaweed farmers are a constituency that has dedicated support from all levels of government. Alpha players, China and Indonesia, dominate eumatoid and gracilaria value chains. This table summarizes the global distribution of alpha, beta, delta, and gamma carrageenan value chain players. As alpha processor, China can supply most global demand for eumatoid carrageenan and gracilaria agar. Access to protected domestic alpha markets give China's processors a decisive global advantage. As alpha seaweed supplier, Indonesia can supply virtually all global demand for eumatoids and probably gracilaria at unbeatable prices. Shared ethnic origins of Chinese, Indonesian, and other Southeast Asian major value chain players facilitate value chains that connect through China. Some business practices that prevail through the China connection include strategic business alliances that often count for more than legalistic business arrangements, business models that emphasize cash flow rather than equity appreciation, and early polluting stages of processing that are being located near to seaweed sources. Lesson 3. Many, if not most, Southeast Asian seaweed value chain players gain competitive advantage through valorization models that may be unacceptable or even illegal in many jurisdictions around the world. Valorized tropical seaweed farms are an outstanding example of large-scale crop production developed from simple methods of adaptive phyconomy refined by farmers in the sea. Phyconomy is a branch of applied phycology. Phyconomy comprises systems of art, science, and technology applied to production systems that yield crops of algae. Adaptive phyconomy is overwhelmingly the approach to farming of tropical seaweeds, but precision phycotechnologies are gradually being adopted, especially for crop logging and cultivar production. Adaptive phyconomy is a low-cost, low-control approach to seaweed farming. It is practiced where biology of algal crops is poorly understood and/or where confounding variables render precision technologies impractical. Precision phyconomy is a high-cost, high-control approach to crop production. It is practiced where biology of algal crops is well understood and culture conditions can be comprehensively controlled. You can learn more from this video on my YouTube channel. Reflexive bottom-up paths build adaptive phyconomy system structures and functions. The adaptive phyconomist is both cultivator and innovator. Lesson 4. The strength of Indonesian seaweed farming lies in the adaptive economy talents of thousands of highly motivated family farmers. Precision economy is evolving into Indonesian farm systems, but many other jurisdictions are probably far more dependent on it for success. Adaptive marine economy is undertaken in socio-ecological production systems that function within coastal marine ecoscapes. In production ecoscapes, people live and work in the same place. Materials and energy flows occur in production ecoscapes. Community enterprises valorize crops and their products through financial transaction flows. Value chains link community enterprises into local, regional, and global market systems. Privileged access to farm sites is a core asset of ecoscape communities. Site tenure is granted to seaweed farmer enterprises by their home villages, usually rent-free. Indonesian farmers do not deal with Europe-scale red tape issues. Lesson 5. Indonesian seaweed farming is integrated into the norms, folkways, and mores of village life and is not tied up in excessive government red tape. Seaweed producers in other jurisdictions may find that competing coastal planning imperatives place seaweed farming at a relative disadvantage. Valorization of tropical red seaweed farms has developed through a series of transaction governance models. These proceed from low to high degrees of explicit coordination. Hierarchical models involve integrated enterprises that own and manage all value chain functions. This company farm approach has been tried many times since early days, and companies still struggle to make it work for seaweed farming. The captive model involves vertically integrated enterprises with value chains controlled and dominated by lead firms. This was the dominant model during early years of development, but it was soon supplanted by modular governance. It functioned well when the business was small and within the capacity of medium-sized processors to fund and control dealings with individual farmers. Modular governance involves control by lead firms that determine product specification, trade rules, and so forth. And it was the dominant model during major value chain development. But it was eventually outpaced by market governance during the 2000s. Modular governance is driven by strategic alliances among processors and trader exporters, with farm development and R&D costs and effort shared. Market governance involves arm's length transactions between buyers and sellers with minimal cooperation among VC players. What matters is price, price, and price. This was the dominant model since the 1990s. But it's waning as value chain players develop more relational models. Market governance led to general market chaos with poor quality controls and stagnating innovation as R&D became copy and follow. Farm development funding, little as it was, mainly came from farmers and traders and no longer by processors. Relational governance systems involve fairly autonomous decision-making among value chain players as collaboration and alliances prevail. Since the mid-2000s, there's been a trend away from market governance and toward relational governance. Relational systems recognized the need for transparent links from seaweed source to value solution. Farm development and processing are moving toward integrated biorefinery systems, and it's essential that standards be applied rigorously, transparently, and globally. Experimentation with transaction governance models has led to a wild ride with cottony prices. These are Indonesian farm gate prices shown in this graph, and you can see that there have been several boom and bust cycles over the last couple of decades. Lesson 6. Indonesian seaweed prices fluctuated wildly as market governance prevailed and other models were tried as means of balancing supply and demand. In all jurisdictions, seaweed value chain players should minimize reliance on market governance. The availability of essentially unlimited supplies of Eukumatoid seaweeds made semi-refined carrageenan commercially feasible. Disruptive SRC technology caused step changes in carrageenan value chains, and most established carrageenan producers hated SRC and tried to kill it. But customers loved that low-energy, low-cost carrageenan, which had desirable flow characteristics. Kappa SRC from Kappa ficus opened huge markets, such as pet food gels and brine pumping for meats. SRC factories were relatively cheap to build, and technology was easily copied. SRC factories proliferated, initially in the Philippines, then in Indonesia, and finally China got in on the act and became the alpha Kappa carrageenan producer. Today, there are upwards of 80 factories around Asia that produce carrageenan and or agar. The original Orta companies have been assimilated into large multinational companies with minimal involvement in seaweed farm development. Eukumatoid seaweeds are now being used for an expanding array of products beyond carrageenan. Innovative process technology emphasizes the multi-stream, zero-effluent Muse approach. For example, here is the C6 Energy Factory in Northern Bali in Indonesia. Our plant biostimulants are applied to a wide variety of agricultural crops around the world. Technologies such as drone applications are used not only to grow our seaweed crops, but also to apply our products to crops. Lesson 7. Tropical red seaweed markets balloon because of new products and markets not anticipated during early farm development. Similar trajectories can be expected in other jurisdictions where seaweed farm development takes place. Indonesian annual seaweed production of 300 to 360,000 tons of dry seaweed worth about $500 million US supports more than 50 to 60,000 farm families. In Southeast Asia, seaweed farming is fundamentally a family business in which individual farm units may be difficult to distinguish because farm families are generally linked into collaborative groups that are, in turn, integrated into ecoscape village life. There's a tendency for women to dominate onshore farming activities, while men dominate activities in the sea. While some people work virtually full-time at farm tasks, seaweed farming is generally a part-time activity that injects cash into the blend of socioeconomic activities. Many phyconomy practices are intentionally inefficient in a way that spreads revenue through the community. For example, excessively small cuttings may be planted as a way of enhancing income for planting groups who get paid piecework for attaching cuttings to lines. Members of groups doing piecework are generally also members of family units that own farm units. So there's not a clear owner versus worker dichotomy. Many farming players work toward achievement of monthly income goals rather than toward maximizing income. This can lead to an apparent anomaly that rising crop prices can result in lowered seaweed production. Lesson 8. Southeast Asian coastal community socio-economic imperatives can result in value chain behavior that seems anomalous according to the norms of the West. This must be accounted for by producers in other jurisdictions who are selling into global markets. The Coral Triangle presents tremendous opportunities for aquaculturists. The Coral Triangle has over 70% of seacoast within 10 degrees of the equator. Coral Triangle ecoregions include many areas where seaweed either is being grown or probably can be grown. Indonesia leads seaweed farm development opportunities in the Coral Triangle because it has about 95% of the sea area and 55% of the sea coast, with a population that has risen from the numbers shown here to close to 270 million by now. Lesson 9. The Coral Triangle in general, and Indonesia in particular, have vast unrealized potential for tropical seaweed farming. Development of available opportunities in the Coral Triangle will have implications for the entire global aquaculture community. So lesson 10 is my final overview. It seems to me that seaweed farming valorization models in Indonesia are systemically different from those appropriate to many jurisdictions around the world. But Indonesian seaweeds enter global value chains, so there must be global understanding among phyconomy practitioners around the world.